Rich is back or not? What did he? Oh,
We don't have any viewers waiting.
I wore this for you.
Oh, cool.
This is from the Asheville Bee Whisperer.
Yeah, Bay
whatever.
City.
Yeah.
Nice.
you're the queen
When
bee.
are you scheduled to get your bee?
In time, they said mid-April would be, they just let us know, so.
Where are you picking them up?
In Weaverville, in the
Where?
Hive and Honey place in
Oh,
Weaverville.
Hive and Honey.
Yeah.
Honey and the Hive.
Honey and Hive. I always say it backwards.
Is that the place when you come through Weaverville and you,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you're, yeah, I remember it.
Actually, they have a nice shop. It's,
Oh,
they have a
yeah.
lot of stuff in there. So,
Not got anything you need.
yeah. I did want to say something that has nothing to do with the study, but I listen to audiobooks when I go back and forth to Indiana, which I have a hard time having time to read, and I love to read. But anyway, the last book that I did was by Charles Martin, and it's called What If It's True? If you get a chance to read it, it was really, really good.
Okay.
And I think it's probably one of those books that's better to listen to. Most of them I think are better to read, but the author actually narrates the book, which is unusual.
I really
You
like
don't
it when the
usually
author does.
see that.
Most of the ones I have the author
Oh, really?
narrating. Yeah,
Really?
this one has the author narrating. He just talks so slow.
Charles Martin.
Charles Martin.
What if
Charles
it's
Martin
true?
usually writes fiction, but this is a nonfiction. It's What If It's True?
What if it's true?
And it's a really challenging book because I think, well, there's parts in it where he does like, he has done like a narrative of certain parts of the Bible. Like it starts out with the birth narrative, and he adds his own, it's like he adds to it to make it more rich, I think. And then his narration of the crucifixion is really moving. But he talks also about some things that I think are really challenging as far as in our Christian faith. Talks a lot about the role of suffering and of confession to each other. And I think those are two things that are really hard for most Christians to think that there's a role for those two things. And he makes a big point of that. I thought it was really good. So I would recommend it to anybody that's probably already a Christian to read, because it'll deepen what you think about your faith.
Cool.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
sharing.
Yeah. I do most of my books on audio because reading is hard.
I have so many books to be read.
I like
Oh,
to
yeah,
read
I
because
do too.
I like to read because I get to sit down.
Yeah.
If you're listening, you can get up, walk around. I reckon.
Yeah, if you're listening, you can do other things, but it's
That
really
is
good
true.
to listen in the car if you have any long trips.
Yeah.
It really does.
It makes the mind.
It's just
I like
quicker.
to sit down and put my feet up and read.
It's just
Oh,
way quicker
yeah.
for me to be read to. I realize a lot of people can read faster than they're read
And
to.
I've heard some people
But I
say
cannot.
that if it's a really slow, someone's reading it really slow,
Speed
you can
it up.
speed it up.
Yeah, that's what I have to do with this one. With with how to be an anorexist, man, he talks slow. So I definitely have to speed his up to listen to it.
Charles Martin's pretty good as far as his pace for me. Anyway.
Does he narrate? Does
Yeah.
he read it?
Most of the books I've listened to lately have been by the authors. That's interesting.
Well, I've
isn't
done
it?
more fiction.
Oh,
I
well
write
then, yeah,
fiction. I listen to more fiction, and they're usually read by
that's
other.
true. It's true. Yeah, they're voice actors or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like. And if you want to get the Libby app, you can put your library information
That's
in,
right.
and
That's
then you
right.
can get audiobooks to your phone.
And you can get them from the library. We have
Oh.
we have an e-library.
That's cool.
E-library in Madison County.
You just put the app on your phone and just pull it right up from there, and you can actually read books right from your phone there as well. You can pull it up, and that's very convenient for when I've needed to read something for Zoe and we've been somewhere different. I'm like, oh, pull it up on the app. Anyway, though,
Morning, Harry.
let's see if
Hi.
we do have someone with us. Yay, welcome. Okay, cool. Prayer concerns for us, Sarah. Of course, we're gonna. Want any update on how she's doing?
Jim and Kathy were with her yesterday. She wanted to go out shopping. So I think Kathy pushed her around in a wheelchair. And they went to several places. And I texted him this morning. I just was wondering how she's doing with her mother there. And he hasn't replied yet. But I would be glad,
I went to visit with Kay when I went to see her on Saturday.
Okay.
And Kay's foot is doing much better. She still has to elevate it a lot, but it's not so swollen now.
Good, good.
And so she still has to get in her car and drive over up the driveway to get to
Mhm.
Sarah's instead of being able to walk across the uneven ground. But she can get to her.
Good.
So,
And Robin's gone home?
yes.
Okay.
So yeah. Sarah was just really tired when I saw her.
Yeah. I think she
tires out.
tires easily.
Keep praying for her. I want to keep praying for Carol.
Carol and the family.
Yeah, right. What was I saying?
Yeah, I asked Heath for her address.
Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to hear it.
He put it out on the email. I can put it on the email for
I'll send you what I've got.
Okay, I want to see it. I might have it somewhere.
That's the one that's the parishioner at my other church who lives up in Floral, whose son died. He was like in his 40s. Died of colon cancer, and that's what her husband had died of colon cancer as well. So he
Well, she was part of a Primrose music group
yes,
with 3 women.
Lorna
And
passed.
she also is an artist.
She is.
Very
She's
good.
been
She teaches
a
art
vendor
classes.
at
Yeah.
some of our festivals. With her
And
family.
she's played music at some of our festivals too, and played here at the church as well. But yeah, remember Carol and the family. Other prayer concerns? Or well, let us be an attitude of prayer. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks for today. We give you thanks for a time to gather, to open our spirits that we might be increased in this time. Lord, we lift to you for your care, for your healing, for your strengthening. Sarah, Carol, and all the family, all that are mourning and missing Chuck. We hold up to you the concerns not mentioned. We hold up to you our country, the places where people are mourning. We hold up to you our world, and we ask that you bring peace. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. So we had 2 chapters. Were these a little longer? Is it a little harder to get through? Yeah. White and black are 2. So ebony.
Who would have thought there were so many different ways to be racist? Each chapter is, a whole nother view, whole nother angle to look at things. Interesting. I never thought about that before.
There's a lot of, honestly, you can take different vantage points on all sorts of issues, to be honest. And if you get a slightly different lens, you get a slightly different
Yes.
perspective of what is happening. And that yellow thing is never good. I hope it's still working.
I have a bias that I recognized a couple of weeks ago. I listen to NPR a lot, especially when I'm in the car. And on Sunday, I guess, I don't know whether she's there on Saturday, but she's there on Sunday morning. The person who is the moderator in the morning, I would guess that she is a black person.
Yeah. I've heard it too.
Her accent is quite different than normal classically voices on NPR that you can't tell an accent. They're just like that amorphous kind of thing that they think is the right
Yeah.
voice. She definitely has a southern black way of speaking. And I went, oh, I noticed it. And I thought,
Which one is she?
I don't even know what her name is.
Okay.
Do you know what her name is? Anyway,
No,
she's
she's
there on
on
Sunday
Sunday
mornings.
mornings,
Sunday mornings when they do
I
the
never
Will
listened to her.
Short's puzzle thing, because I always like to listen to that.
She's
And
working on it down.
yeah, and the more I thought about it, I thought, that is a bias, girl. You have a bias there. You need to work on that. Yeah.
Well, you can't help what your ears hear. I don't think.
But you can
Did
decide.
did it bother you that she talked differently?
It did at first. It did. I have to admit that. But then the more I thought about it, I thought,
I like hearing Southern accents. Makes me happy if I hear a Southern accent on the radio or something. You know, I really don't that often.
I'm really sure that they purposely have included her. I think they want to maybe hopefully expand their readership and also to allow listeners to listen to other ways of speaking, maybe. You know, I'm pretty sure it was a conscious thing.
Probably. Sorry, I kept looking down. I was making sure there wasn't anything wrong with the stream, and I wasn't doing anything about that. That's all I was trying to make sure.
So we are streaming today?
Yeah,
Okay.
we have
Well,
two
Marcy
people.
Sunday and
Did
she
she
checked everything out.
did she figure out what was wrong with Sundays?
She checked the computer and everything seemed to be fine. There wasn't no surges or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't no.
So you think we'll be okay for Sunday?
Oh yeah, she thinks it's fine.
Oh, okay.
Good. Yeah, I mean, and this is working, so should be fine. I hate that we weren't streaming on Sunday.
Yeah.
But we watched you. On Sunday.
Oh, and Marcel.
I did the service on Sunday.
I didn't mess up the order of service when I was at Marcel like I did here. Jeez, Sunday was a weird day, though.
That was okay. It's
You're
fine. It keeps us
human.
on our toes, right?
Yeah, really. Keep Nathan on his toes trying to flip through everything.
Mhm.
I didn't even notice. Anyway,
Well, it worked out okay.
yeah. Yeah, God's okay with it. I'm sure. So, about the chapter, let's look at White. What did you learn from this chapter? What aspect of it hit you?
We spent a lot of time researching the devil race.
Yeah, and then when he was talking about his experience in college, talked about how following the election of George W. Bush there in Florida, he was in Florida, and of course it was quite the center of everything. I very much remember that as well. And he saw the whites as the devil and went on a long track of being racist against white people.
But it scares me when he starts talking about voters being disenfranchised at the voting booth.
I mean, that's still
Nothing,
happening.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And it scares me because we've never gotten any better at this. We still allow this to happen.
I mean, there's
how is that-
gerrymandering is completely that. It's
True.
You got a district that goes right through A&T University to split the African American vote, so they
Yeah,
have less
yeah,
power.
yeah.
I mean, that's
It's
for some
just-
reason constitutional. I don't know.
Tried to work it out, and now it's come raising its head back up again.
Yeah.
I mean, did we ever try to work it that out, or do we just make it look like it, or the votes were going the way people wanted, so we
Started trying to work on it, but it didn't happen. It didn't get
There,
done.
there isn't enough political will to fix it, and
because
that's the problem.
you've got a situation where you got the people in power who are in power because of gerrymandering, and they're going to keep doing the gerrymandering in order to stay in power.
That's right.
And I don't understand how gerrymandering is legal under our constitution, because it's the opposite of a democracy.
Yeah,
It really is.
and yet it's allowed
Of course,
to
people
happen.
point out that it's a republic, not a democracy, which it is. I have to admit, they spent too much time selling me on the idea of democracy to now tell me we have a republic and I should deal with it. I don't know. Ever since I found out, and when I took the government class I had to in high school about the Electoral College, I was appalled that that's how we did things. I was like, I thought we lived in a democracy. To find out my vote meant more than somebody's vote in California, and that somebody in Alaska's vote meant more than mine, it was very,
Mhm.
I was like, that is quite sad. But anyway, aside from the politics on a larger scale, the politics on a smaller scale, which he was aware of, which, are you guys aware of how much, how much is done to suppress African American votes? I mean, it's been in the news a lot lately with Georgia.
Oh, there's a lawsuit, isn't there?
I'm sure, lots of them. I don't know. There's a lot that's done. There's been a lot about like the disenfranchising black voters by saying they can't vote after they get out of prison, and
Yeah, lying to people that you can't, that you're not allowed to vote when you are.
yeah, but even the place where they don't allow you to vote if you've had a felony, and that
Right.
disproportionately affects the people who are disproportionately put in jail.
Right.
And-
But
and-
it does affect all those people that have committed felonies.
All the people.
Black or white, but there's more blacks.
There's
in
more
prisons.
blacks.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you also have people, the poorer people are the people more likely to that effect because they don't have money for a lawyer, so they're under the public defendant, so they're going to plead to a lesser deal, but potentially still a
They
felony
wanna get-
because they have to get out, and so that it just disenfranchises the poor and disproportionately.
Too,
Right.
one of the things I really hadn't thought about it, but how they would take their names off of the,
Yeah, if you haven't voted in blah,
Register.
blah, blah, that's,
and
they have
then,
different reasons.
when they come to do a provisional ballot, there's all these stipulations, and then the provisional ballot doesn't count.
Well, there's the big discussion in North Carolina about voter ID.
Oh,
You have to bring and there are people who don't have.
I'm
Driver's
sorry,
license.
I had trouble with that. I feel like we could do something about that and still have IDs. We could go to those areas and get IDs for people that, not necessarily a driver's license. Even my mother, who has dementia, has
Yeah.
gotten to get it's not a driver's license, it's just an ID, because she said, I wanna vote and I'm not driving anymore, and I'm gonna get there and get it done. So, but I think we could make provision to go to those areas that don't have that ability and get that done.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we need to have ID. We have ID for everything else. Why would we not have it for voting? I have to have an ID to do anything, don't you? Just about. You have to prove who you are.
I'm trying to think the last time I had to pull out my ID to prove who I was.
I think instead of saying you don't have to have an ID, we should find another solution. We should get people IDs. And-
Yeah, I mean that would
and
be an
make it
exerted
easier.
effort to try to do that, and
But people wanna say, oh, we don't want IDs, it's like, really? We have IDs for everything else.
I mean,
You're not gonna be able to fly if you don't have an ID.
true, but flying is not a constitutional right.
That's true. But shouldn't we have to identify ourselves? Just throw that whole thing out that more people are voting than what should. If you had everybody had an ID, then it throws that idea out because you have one person for one vote. You're gonna be able to track it easier. If you have no ID, how do you track that? That a person didn't come back through or go to different polling sites and vote? How would you ever track that and even be able to say,
Yeah.
this
I
is
guess
fair?
I'm trusting the people who do the research on it to say there's very little situations of voter fraud that happen.
But how
But
would
yeah,
they know? How would they know if you had no ID? You wouldn't know. You'd
Yeah.
never be able to prove it. I'm sorry, I'm being the devil's
Well,
advocate here, but
I like the
I
devil's
think
advocate.
you can
Yeah.
go help people get IDs. They need IDs for other reasons. Help them get IDs. It's not just for voting.
I'm not really sure what that would entail, but okay.
But I think we could be creative about it and get it done.
As long as we do it justly,
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
I mean,
Would
why
it-
couldn't you go to some of the inner city churches and have days where, go to I may say inner city, but some
The
of
coun-
rural,
yeah,
obviously,
the
too.
rural
There's rural
spaces,
areas
yeah.
around here, but probably the biggest problem is in the inner city. I've got
Yeah, 'cause you don't-
churches, I think they would allow you to do that. And just have people come and get IDs, that they could walk there and get it done.
Yeah.
Well, there was something in here, something about the type of paper that the registration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we list out the
Good
paper?
grief, that's extreme.
Yeah.
And the certainly the number of polling places where in Africa there's fewer of them.
See, that's the thing, you
There's
get
longer
more polling
waiting.
places down in the areas where people need them to be. I don't think the solution is, I think that's sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Solution is not no ID, the solution is let's get people IDs. Let's get the polling places to where they need to be. Let's make that as a solution, instead of saying, well, we don't need to know who's voting. It's like, to me, that's just ridiculous.
I think in times past, it was an issue with people voting in different polling places, but with, electronics now, I'm not sure that would work.
If you had no ID, how would they know? That's my
You tell them
concern.
who you are and they mark it off. So if you told them, she said you could go to a different place and tell them a different name.
Well, you would be registered.
Yeah.
Under that name.
Yeah, but if you told somebody a name of somebody that was registered in another polling place, she's
They
saying the
wouldn't
same
know.
person could go and give a name for somebody
Say that
registered
person
in a
hadn't
different
voted,
place.
you knew they weren't going in to vote, just give that name.
You would just have to know a person
Oh, I see what
that
you're
was
saying.
registered in a different area.
Yeah.
You'd have
But
to
how
know.
many- But the bottom line is, how many of those would you have to have to sway an election? An awful lot,
Probably an awful lot,
an awful lot.
but I still think people should have ID. I just, I
In
think
the
we have to
old-
do it for everything else.
In the old days, I can remember having to sign the book.
Yeah.
Did they do that
See,
here?
I'm used to in Indiana, we have always had voter ID.
They
We've
had this
always
big
had to
ledger,
sign
and
for
Okay.
it,
would
and that's why
compare
my
your
mother was so adamant.
signature to
I've
prior
got to get
signatures.
my ID, cause I want to vote.
So what is done there as far as making sure populations can get IDs?
Well, she had my nephew take her to DMV.
Oh, I meant like in places like in inner cities and stuff. Like what is done there to make sure people.
I don't know that there is much done. I think they do have, I did read the last election, they did have people that had tried to help people get registered and get that, but I don't know who was organizing that. I had read something about that there was some effort to do that. But it needs to be more. I'm just saying, in Indiana, we've always had ID, it's been something we've been used to. To say that we're actually doing something to make it better in those areas, no, I don't know that we are. Because I don't think people are making that a priority. And I think we could.
Yeah. So that's interesting, yeah. So you come and play, see, because I've always been in a place that didn't require it, so yeah.
Yeah, I've always lived someplace where it did, but probably the place that does have more inner city is Indianapolis. And Indianapolis almost always typically goes Democrat, whereas the rest of the state is almost totally Republican, just historically.
Typical of any
Yeah, of
large
any-
city, yeah.
You know, but yeah, I think we could do better, and I just feel like, I know there's people that feel like churches shouldn't get involved in politics, but that's where sometimes I feel like the churches could get involved in.
Well, I mean, churches have been involved in trying to get people to the polls, and they've been polling sites.
Polling sites, but how about sites to get registered, how about sites to get IDs? you know, how about making it more available to where it's where the people are?
Yeah.
Or closer to where the people are. And just make it known, hey, you can come over to such and such a church or the.
I mean, you can make some of the places non-church too. Like, I like the fact that you can register and early vote at the same time in North Carolina. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, get it done at the same time. Yeah, I think a lot of places you can't do that, you have to be registered way ahead. of
Yeah,
time.
way ahead. Like North Carolina, you could show up any place too. You don't have to be in your polling location.
Right, and they did change that in Indiana not long ago. Before you had to be at the place where you're supposed to be now, it can be any place in the state.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
Yeah.
I don't know, I think we need to be creative about how
Well,
we
I
solve
think-
these problems.
I think, and I can't remember her name, Stacey Abrams, yay! Stacey Abrams, was a big, led the charge in Georgia to go door to door
Get people registered,
and register black, voters.
Well,
And
I don't see
supposedly
there's any
that's,
problem with that. Why not?
and I think that's why, the outcome of the elections in Georgia happened that way. Because there were a lot more black voters that actually voted. But the whole idea of that somebody can just decide to purge people from the list
Right.
because maybe they hadn't voted in the last two elections or whatever
But yeah.
Yeah,
criteria,
that sort of stuff's out.
that's terrible.
Yeah.
Because who knows what
And
was
then
happening
to show up to vote and say you can't vote. There's a lot of problems there and we're not, it's certainly not on people's radar enough to make a difference in how that's done. It's just the ways of doing business. You know, no one seems to, there isn't this groundswell of thinking that we need to change that.
Well, I mean, the groundswell would need to come from the people. Would typically come from a person who's being disenfranchised, and those are the people on the whole which have less money, less resource, less time and energy. If you are poor and working and trying to get food on the table and trying to get the kids and take care of
It's not high on
things,
your list.
it's just you don't have enough bandwidth for it.
Well, that's where someone did come to your door, perhaps.
Yeah.
But perhaps you wouldn't let them in either. You might not let them in, you might not know what they're there for and not
Yeah.
let 'em in. I don't know, but I mean, I think there's
But
ways
yeah,
that
you
we
could
can
help
do
with
it.
that.
And just to help people realize, yes, we do care about your vote. Because I think there's an awful lot of people in poor population that feel like their vote doesn't count.
Yes.
And so it's an attitude thing too. And
Uh-huh.
if someone actually came to their door and said, I would really like to register you to vote, it's important that you vote, they won't do this. Maybe that was sort of
It did
change that
in
attitude.
Georgia apparently.
Yeah,
So
yeah. To say, yes, your vote does count, you get you registered. And make it just as easy as possible.
yeah. Because events like that make people feel disenfranchised and angry, and the hate breeds hate, as he
It's hate, but
as
then
he
we
said.
can come up with a really good solution to make it so that it doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, I know that there is frustration amongst all sorts of different populations of people with politics, without a doubt. It's frustrating if you're paying attention. For many different populations of people.
Even today,
Oh, definitely today.
this very day.
I think that, this very day.
Well, and that sort of goes back to the people that are immigrants too, is we need to make things easier for them to become citizens too, because you can't vote if you're not a citizen.
Yes,
And we make it extremely difficult for people to become citizens.
Yeah.
Probably the easiest way that I've ever heard to become a citizen is join the military. Become a citizen almost immediately.
oh wow, yeah, they make it easy there.
They make it easy.
I
But
didn't-
most everything is very expensive.
I remember we used to teach free classes. I mean, I guess you still have to do the money for the paperwork and stuff. But when I was a missionary, that one of the things the neighborhood house would do is have teach people how to pass the citizenship exam and teach them the stuff they need to know, which a lot of natural born American citizens couldn't
They wouldn't
pass.
pass it, right. They
Could
wouldn't
not pass
I
it.
got up and
It makes it very strange, and the things that you have to do, the hoops you have to jump through are very
There's
expensive.
money. Yeah, they're expensive.
And my daughter-in-law is from Ukraine. Her family are all citizens, but it cost them, and this has been many, many years ago, now it's probably much more.
Oh yeah,
About
it went up.
$10,000 each to become a citizen.
Wow.
To go through all the paperwork, and they are not wealthy.
Yeah.
They scrape the money together because they wanted to do it better than that. But there's a whole other big, because they're not citizens, and we don't try to help them.
Yeah, I got a friend, Ecuadorian, and her mom and her siblings, but she just never got the money together to do it, and now she's like, it's much more expensive than it used to be, and she's just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
She goes, I don't care if I can't vote, it's okay. She's trying to keep, take care of the kid and make money and get by, and it's just not as important to her because it costs a lot of money.
Yeah, but we don't talk about those people hardly at all.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about the black voter, the inner city voter that doesn't get their ID, but they're already citizens.
Mm-hmm.
They have one hurdle done.
Yeah.
According to internet, current and former members of the U.S. military do not pay a fee for naturalization. So
That's a big
certainly-
deal.
It is a big deal.
Yeah,
It's
it opens
$10,000.
the door for 'em. It really, it makes it much easier for them to get through. And that's what, I didn't know that until my son was in the military. He said he knew a number of people who joined the military to get their citizenship because they saw it as an easier route to do it.
And
Number
it
of,
is apparently.
Hispanic.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, so yeah, lots of places where you have injustice and the system is laborious for voting. And I guess we're still working on forming a more perfect union.
The question though is how to change the system, because I think it's just very difficult. I've been.
But isn't it very difficult by design?
Yes, and I just haven't figured out, I mean, I keep looking for some ways, especially for our immigrants, how we can help them have an easier way to get citizenship, and I don't know, maybe I haven't worked hard enough, but
I've never actually worked with that population to know. I mean, when I was a missionary, the group I was with, but I wasn't involved in that aspect of the work. So I don't really know. And that was like 25 some years ago. So
the community health center I worked at in Indianapolis, we had a really large Burmese population. And the best thing for them was they had some people who were advocates for them. I think I mentioned that one Burmese gentleman named Jerry, and I don't even know what his Burmese name was, but Jerry was a huge advocate for his people. He could have been doing something, making much more money, just really intelligent, college-educated man, but he worked with people to help them get their citizenship, to where they could pass the test. And so, but, it does take sort of an advocate within your own population, I think, to make a huge difference.
true.
That doesn't change the system, though. That helps them work around the system.
That is true.
So the application fee in 2023 is $1,170.
Just to apply.
Yeah,
And then so there's a bunch of other fees after that.
There's a lot of other things that they have to
and
do.
then it
and
takes,
the paperwork is
about
unbelievable.
9 months.
Just for a person to get a green card and keep a green card is really expensive too. I've had to sign a lot of that paperwork for people that I knew who they were, and I could, another ID thing. Picture, I knew them, I had to sign on their picture to say, I know this person, this is who they are, feel. And they had to have all this proof of vaccinations that they have, much more than what most adults would have to have.
Yeah.
It just was a big deal. I just kept seeing this big deal over and over again for people, and it was the ones that had money that could keep doing it.
Yes.
It wasn't the ordinary person.
Yeah. Immigrants as a whole do better because you have a self-selected group of people who are
Do,
determined
more motivated.
and have enough money,
Mhm.
and so they are, like he was talking about those statistics in another part. He was talking about the African immigrants versus the African Americans. Yeah.
That's somewhat true, but most of them, I would say, come with nothing when they come though. Even if they may have been educated in their own country, but they don't have the opportunity to bring much with them
Yeah.
sometimes. Especially if they're refugees for one reason or another.
True.
So they're starting over.
Yeah. On a whole, I would say they have more drive and more education.
Mhm.
So that's what the statistics seem to bear out. Not completely though, of course. Was it so was it surprising all the different ways of voter suppression?
Yeah.
So can we understand his anger and racism against white people?
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody is using prejudices against you, it's less often for us to be understanding about where they come from, isn't it? If it's you personally, somebody's coming after. I can tell you certainly that I understand lots of people are taught that women can't be ministers. But if somebody comes up to me personally and tells me I can't be a minister, I tend to be less understanding of their standpoint. And I think that is true of everyone. I can understand how the system has taught folks things, but when it's coming at you, it is. People are scared of angry black men, and there is.
When it's out there, it's not so much real, but when it gets right here, it's a whole different story.
My first church was in rural. Were we in Randolph? Yeah, we're in Randolph County, and it was. So we weren't far out of Greensboro. And when I was in seminary, one of the projects that they did, actually one of the people that did the preface of Howard Thurman's book
Oh, okay.
was the professor that did that at my seminary. Actually, I loved him. Anyway, they would bring in different folks that had been in the civil rights movement and actions in the country and have them speak about their events and record it. So we got to hear a lot of people. And so one of the people we heard was this guy from Greensboro, Nelson Johnson. And I got to hear him talk, and I was so moved by his story. He talked about how he'd been a part, and I was in high school at the time, but I did not remember, maybe you guys do, there was the Klan and communist shootout in Greensboro in the 80s. Okay, so that part of the country, they still remembered it. And of course, this was like, my first time in ministry, so it's like 20 years ago too. And so Nelson Johnson was part of that. He was shot then, and he had given up his Christianity and was angry at the world, and he was angry at seeing his friends killed because this police were in cahoots with the Klan and letting them come and shoot folks up to get rid of these angry black communists. And he was very angry. He was on TV, and he talked about how when he was in prison, having to work through where he was, and he returned to the religion of his youth, and he found solace, and he read the Bible, and he's like, I'm going to take this seriously, and it says I have to forgive my enemy, I have to love my enemy. So he orchestrated a way, like he got a place to sit in front of the person who was the leader of the Klan at this restaurant. He got to meet with him. He said, I knew there were guns trained on me, I was certain it was. And I told him I forgave him. Because that's what the gospel said to do. So that's what he did. I was so touched by his story. He had a church in Greensboro. So when I got to this church and they said they wanted to have a revival, and I was like, well, I've never actually been to a revival. I didn't know Methodists did that.
They used to. I know back in the day they used to.
I did. I was unfamiliar with it. I never. This was a different Methodist church than my ever experience. They sang different hymns I'd ever heard of before. We sang Beulah Land. I didn't even know what a Beulah lot was. I had to look it up. And anyway, so I thought, well, this guy is up in Greensboro. Maybe I can get him to come down. His story was so moving. So I worked with the committee and was going to have him come down. And then somebody, when they found out who the person was that was coming, there were people, there was an uproar. We had an emergency SBRC meeting because I was inviting the devil into the church because they remembered him. And he had been a communist. And he was a devil. And so we couldn't let him in. So I had invited him. And so I had, of course, talked with him about all the stuff that was going on. He'd graciously agreed to come down to this little white church, tiny little white church, and preach to them for their revival. And then there was this whole stuff. And he said, you know, he was very understanding of where I was and very cool with it. And we met and we came to a compromise of he would preach one time, one of the nights, and I would get somebody else to preach the other nights. And then he invited me to come up and preach at his church one time. So that was fun. I did that. And it was funny because when people say amen, I felt like I needed to stop. Oh, did you want to speak? I was so not used to the amen. It was so funny. But anyway, but I remember when I talked to my group there and I said, okay, well, tell me, is it because of him or is it because he's black? Because I want to know, should I not ask anybody else black? And they said, no, you ask somebody who's black. But I think that was maybe just the people that was in my SPRC group. But
then, so they did not realize that he had changed his
Well,
thinking?
well, they weren't part of the planning of it. So when it got advertised and they found out who it was,
They only remembered.
there were people who weren't in that small group that had been a part of the planning and the general population. And I didn't realize he'd been so much on TV at that time. And people would, they remembered the angry black communist man. And, you know, and he's communist, so he's godless. So you can't let him in the church, can't let the devil in the church. And I'm like, but he converted. He's Christian now. He's a preacher. I've heard his testimony. He's truly a Christian. And it's like saying Paul can't come preach to you because he persecuted Christians, you know.
Yeah.
They hadn't heard the rest of the story, and they didn't want to hear the rest.
They didn't want to hear the rest of the story. They didn't want to hear the rest of the story. I think there were some people maybe that left and didn't come back until I had left the church. Because I had let him in. But there was the memory of that, and it was strong and visceral. And maybe I should have been more empathetic to where folks were. I did bring in one other black preacher, the woman, she and a couple other people. But anyway.
Memory's a hard thing. If you had a bad experience, it's a hard thing.
It is.
But it can go the opposite direction too. You can have a good experience with another group and that be in your mind too. But if you don't allow any of that, you keep yourself so separated, then it's easier to call that group the devil, or that person the devil.
And isn't that what our country is so about right now on political lines?
Yes.
Evil. Those folks that are not in my political party are evil. Evil.
Except if you're really out in the world, if you really meet different people. I have so many people on both ends of the poles that are friends. And they're not evil people. They just see things differently.
The thing is, theologically speaking, evil is located within. We all have the capability of evil,
But we're all made in the image of God too.
and we're all made in the image of God.
We have both.
Amen. We have
Warring
both.
against each other all
Yeah,
the time.
true.
I would say we're made in the image of God, but we have capability of making very evil choices. I remember, and I think that there's very dualism that was taught to us at a young age, and honestly, kids shows are not so dualistic as they used to be. But you had a good guy and a bad guy. Zoe was a little kid, and she's like, "Is that the bad guy?" And I paused the movie, and I said, "I understand what you're asking for the sake of the movie." She was like 3 years old, and I started this at 3 years old. I said, "But in the real world, there aren't good and bad guys. There's just good and bad choices." Because and as she got older, I was able to explain to her more. You can get used to making good choices, and you can get used to making bad choices. But every person has the capability of making good and bad choices. So if you think there are bad people, then you can justify the bad choice of being mean to them because you think they are bad, and then that's you making a bad choice. And so she took this on more than I could have imagined. She is more compassionate than I am. She will hold me to my prejudices that I don't realize I have. It's kind of, I've created a monster to a certain extent.
Although it is a prejudice of a sort, I catch myself the other day, I was talking to my daughter and her husband about the story of the man, I think it was in Florida, that shot his wife and then threw the 2-year-old into the alligators.
Oh, yeah.
And they found the 2-year-old's body in the mouth of an alligator. And my first response was, that person who did this is just evil. And I thought, and I had to catch myself and say, his choices were really evil. I don't know this person. I don't know what's going on. I mean, the act was extremely evil, but
The
this
act was,
person,
the person is in the image of God
yeah.
and
But it's hard to
broken.
catch yourself in that. And I don't know anything about that person. I don't know what color they are, what anything they are, but just the act that they did. I think anybody would say that's an evil act of what this person did.
And that is undoubtedly a very broken person
Yes.
that could do such an
Yes.
evil act as that. And we don't know what caused that breakage. We don't know.
But I think that's the whole message of Jesus, is that we can be redeemed, no matter what. And so many of the characters in the Bible, I love that the Bible is so real. I mean, we know that Moses killed an Egyptian. We know that David had an affair with Bathsheba and had her husband killed. We know all these things, but yet we also know that people are redeemed by their faith. And Paul, all the horrible things that Paul did, but all the wonderful things he did after the Damascus Road. But that's hard to sometimes believe that someone who's done such an evil thing could be redeemed. But if we don't, then none of us, what do any of us have? Really?
It is really easy for us to demonize groups of people. It's harder to demonize individual people that you know.
Yeah, but if you hear about something like on the television or on the radio, it's easy to, you don't know that person.
Yeah. And groups of people can be blamed, as we know. And it is frightening, the rise in anti-Semitism and the rise of anti-trans legislation. And talk about picking on a minority. That's a tiny minority of the population. It's easy to pick out groups to blame immigrants or whichever groups we're going to. As I said, the parties, jeez, fucking. I have seen posts on Facebook, people that were parishioners that I challenged. I said, this side is evil. Wait. I'll take a time to challenge that, because that's not how we understand evil in a theological understanding. That is what he did. He saw evil in white people, and then he found himself in this tense situation, recognizing himself in this angering comment that this man said. So we'll hold up value for a person who can see themselves in change.
Yeah.
Let us be all people who can see ourselves in change. So we heard about Malcolm X, let's see, and his hate and his conversion. Did you guys know that Malcolm X had changed at the end?
Yes, I saw the movie.
There you go, you saw the movie.
Denzel Washington made a very good Malcolm X.
I actually never saw
It's
the
a very
movie.
good movie.
I should watch it, yeah.
Yeah.
I had known that he had, but I had not seen the movie. So, what about the Black chapter? Have you guys seen the movie of the Central Park Five? Not that it was mentioned on this.
I haven't seen the movie.
It's a documentary. Well, maybe it's a movie.
But I
don't know.
remember it because I
Netflix.
was still living.
Yeah, it was on. I had not remembered that story from. I guess I was maybe their age. I guess, but it is,
Years until they were exonerated. It was
Yeah.
a long time.
and yeah, it was brutal and awful. Anyway, it made me think of that too, with this sort of like the discrimination and what has happened and the demonizing of Black youth. It is heart-wrenching. If you want to watch it, be prepared. The last kid is the harshest story. They have to build you up for that. Prep yourself for it if you're willing to watch it. It's heart-wrenching. But anyway, so power. Let's have a discussion about how he discusses power. That racism required the prejudice with the power. Have you guys heard of racism, understood it that way before?
Yeah.
Others? Was that a concept that you were would understand the difference between a prejudice and prejudice with power?
I'm thinking it doesn't just go by racism, it's across the board, anything.
Like there's difference if you have power for whatever prejudice you have.
Yeah.
I think if you have power, you can act on that racist thought. If you don't have power, you can't really act on it as much.
As
You
much.
still have the attitude.
Yeah. When I was trained as a missionary, that's why we were told that Black people couldn't be racist, or minority groups couldn't be racist because they didn't have power. This exact thing he talked to. And I remember people arguing about that. There are locations and places where people have power who are Black. And they can act racist. And the concept that having the prejudices, that I would say that the prejudices are still hurting people, whether depending on how much power you have, but we all have maybe more power than we realize to influence. We have that power as a section. As a teacher, you had power within your classroom. Not ultimate power. But you have power.
As a parent, you have
Power, yes, as a parent, certainly as a preacher, I have a lot of power. But as a doctor, you have power. There's an aspect of power in lots of different settings and lots of different ways.
I think he's trying to say that no matter what race you are, we all humans have the ability to think that they're better than somebody else. So it's a human thing.
So, what about his idea that if you are being racist, that you are injuring not just the other race, but your own race?
Yeah. You know, I read the book by Coates. What's his name? Nisi Coates. Yeah. The water. What's it called? The water.
I can't remember. But your accent showing through when you say water. It's funny.
Sorry.
I like it. I like accents.
Anyway, it's a story set during the Civil War
Mhm.
from a slave's point of view. And it's sort of a little, it's not a straightforward fiction, it's a little mystical stuff in there as well. But at one point, he says that he has one of the characters say that it wasn't that slavery, the institution of slavery didn't just affect black people, it also affected white people. And that to me was like a whole nother revelation, because the his understanding was that the white people had damage done to them as well by being slave owners and participating in that.
Well, it's gotta damage your soul, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
exactly. I think that's what he meant.
I mean, that is a place where I think it challenges us when we want to just not make waves and be quiet and let injustice happen. Because we don't want to make waves. Who am I to say something? Who am I to stand against this? Is that if you allow somebody to stay in sin and don't stand up for yourself or for whatever situation, you're allowing a person to damage their soul. So if you don't stop somebody from, so a wife that's being abused who isn't standing up in her power is allowing her husband to damage his soul and abuse against her. And I mean, it's not victim blaming. That's just saying both people are being damaged.
Yeah,
in the situation.
The book is called The Water Dancer, and I would recommend it. It's really a great read, and it incorporates a lot of his thinking about the the the, the black slaves whose father was the slave owner. They were treated differently than the black people who were more pure black. There was this hierarchy even in the black community on a plantation. Uh, you were valued more if you had more white blood in you than black blood. Um, it's just it's a great story, great story. And you got in there. What's her name? They called her Moses. The woman who was the woman who went back, who was a slave,
Harriet Tubman?
Harriet Tubman. So she's in this book as well, and how this young man, the story is of this young man who escapes and ends up in like Philadelphia, and what life was like in Philadelphia at that time, because they were free. Slaves slaves who got there were free, and they had their own little lives. And then he goes back to rescue other people that he left behind. And of course, his father was the slave owner, and he ended up having to take care of his half brother, who was a ne'er-do-well white son of the slave owner, and it was his job to take care of this guy and to get him out of jams and to take care of him, and what kind of a relationship that was on him. And it's a great book, The Water Dancer. Ta-Nehisi Coates.
So what did, as far as like looking at these two chapters together, I think maybe we can, it's supposed to pull something together for us to look as a, for some reason it's harder for me this week with this one than it was last week. But I guess it's just to recognize that there are ways in which we are prejudiced. We can be prejudiced against our own kind and not realize it.
Oh, yes.
And I it was funny when I went away to college. I had a chemistry teacher that had a southern accent. When he first started talking, my first thought was like, "Oh, geez, what is this guy like? Ernest Angley chemistry hour. I thought him less intelligent when he spoke with a southern accent. And I'm like, I have bought into the narrative that the culture has taught me that as a southerner, that southerners are less intelligent. And I was shocked to realize that of myself. And that's, I think, that same sort of element that he's talking about is that blacks absorbing the racism against blacks that is in the culture.
I think it was one way for them to separate themselves from the kinds of
The
public
negative imagery.
view
Yeah.
of those people. Well, I'm not like that. I'm different.
Yeah, I mean, I did that with my femininity as well, as an engineer. I did, with my southernness and my femininity. Whatever was the inferior, I mentally distanced myself from it.
It goes back to that
I think
assimilation thing.
we've all been there.
Sometimes you have
Yeah.
to assimilate to actually achieve what you want to, and then are you gonna do something with that when you get to that point?
Assimilate in order to get through the system, but when you accept the negative and bring it in your head,
Then it's hard to get it out of you. Yeah.
you have to figure out how to process that. And becoming a mother was hard for me, in part because I could no longer deny. Actually, getting married and becoming a mother were hard. Those two different steps, because it was hard to deny the femininity of those roles. And that was
And
odd for me
embrace
to
them if
realize.
they're good. Yeah, because you're good roles.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was hard for me to recognize my own prejudice, my own sexism, internalized sexism. Just like I had internalized prejudice against Southerners. And so he was recognizing his internalized prejudice against black people. And so there's lots of different layers of ways in which we have to examine ourselves.
Layer upon layer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And go ahead.
I'm not ready yet. I'm trying to formulate in my mind what I needed to say.
Well, I'll say it's hard work, but it's valuable work. We can love more perfectly if we love ourselves more perfectly, and if we can see the layers of things. And it's not like we have to whitewash people to say that they are perfect in some way. They're not. They're all of us. We have our failings and our prejudices and racisms or whatever. But I mean, if we just paint somebody and say they're racist, or no, they're a good person, they can't be racist, both of those are ignoring the reality.
And all bits and pieces of each within wholeness.
Yeah. So you can love a person who is different than you and recognize that there is an image of God, even though some of those actions are important to us. Sometimes it's hard when they've thrown a 2-year-old to an alligator.
It is hard. It is hard. And I think keeping in mind that image of God piece, but also keeping in mind that we all have some evil within us, that we do have that dualism, and that some people become more overwhelmed by one side than the other, but all of us
Both
have
are
fallen,
true.
have sinned and
Yes.
fallen short.
And I think the racist part has to do not with a particular race, but the race that you're in right then. You're whatever it is. It's not necessarily a thing of black and white and brown and yellow. It's
And seeing yourself as better than someone else, really, in the bottom line.
Yeah. See ourselves as
Whatever.
better as Christians. We are churchgoers. We're better than people that don't go, right? You know.
Challenging people have been damaged by
And
churches and
and
never
then-
come back.
And even within Christianity, you know,
The good side and the
one
bad
group
side.
looks down upon another group, for
Yeah.
whatever.
These
Criteria
people who are
you
leaving
wanna
the United
have.
Methodist Church, for those of us that are staying in the United Methodist Church, and you know, another dividing line of deciding who's good and bad.
And they each have their reasons. What's interesting, I mean, that whole thing is, you know, the African church led a lot of the division as far as from things that I have read. the African United Methodist Church.
Oh, yeah, the Methodist Church in Africa, yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
And one of the names of the people that was listed in that was Reverend Anthony Dio. He's from Liberia, and I had met him,
Oh, wow.
and he's a good man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I saw
Yeah.
his name, he's like, but he has his reasons for believing what he believes. And if I had him in front of me, I would talk to him about the whole thing and how I feel about it and how he feels about it.
And
But
he's been fed information from a source.
Or he has his own experiences that have led to where
Yeah.
he's at.
Mhm.
But I'll never forget being in the car with this man, driving someplace, and I asked him about his family. He says, right now, I don't know where my children are. I'm hoping that they're safe. This was during the Civil War.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know where my children are. And I thought, oh. So he's been through some horrific experiences.
Yeah.
I don't know where he's at, but I know he's a part of this movement.
Yeah.
To split
Just
a
what?
church, because I saw his name and was like, oh gosh, I know this man. But I did find out later that his children were with either his parents or his wife's parents. I don't know which one, but they were with the grandparents and they were safe. But he didn't know they were safe for a long, long time. And I can't imagine the emotional anguish of that during a very bloody civil war, not knowing where your children came.
And honestly, I guess, you can see how an experience like that, you have to cling to faith
Mm-hmm.
in a definitive way, and maybe you're trying to make sure that the Methodist Church has got this definitive understanding, and that's where I can see that. I can see that that's
Yeah.
where you would want to go with the. I also trust there's a certain amount of manipulation going on in those discussions for people
Yeah.
that are power brokered by the U.S.
Yeah.
interests.
I don't know. I know this is really interesting. I would like to talk to him. It's been years since I've seen him, but it's if you know somebody personally, you can't demonize that person.
True.
You just
Amen. It's hard to hate up close.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
Then again, maybe it's easier to hate because I don't hate the people that that've been hurt by closely. No, I don't know.
That personally.
It's hard to demonize people that are up close.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It's easier to say those people over there.
Yeah.
Made this decision.
just
And I
just
don't
like he
agree
did.
with it, but I never have a chance to actually really talk to them and figure out why they feel that way.
Yeah. Well, next week we have class and space. Like outer space? No, I can't remember what space
And I
is
won't
about.
be here next week because we're leaving on Tuesday for a little Alabama and Georgia road trip. So I will be,
Racialized space.
I don't, Suzanne, did you hear me? Have you heard of my little thing, my little trip? Okay.
I don't think I.
A friend of mine, Nancy, goes to Holy Spirit. So she's also in the Sacred Ground program. But she invited me, she's a retired teacher, and two other friends of hers who are she used to work with them, retired teachers. And they had planned to do this social justice trip. And she asked me if I wanted to go, and I went, oh, sure. So we sat a couple of meetings together trying to figure out what we wanted to do, what we wanted to see. And we're leaving next Tuesday for 4 days, and we're going to Birmingham. We're going to Montgomery to the Equal Justice Museum and Memorial. We're going to Selma. We're going to walk across the bridge.
Oh.
And then we're going to Atlanta. We're doing the circle. We're going to Atlanta to the Martin Luther King thing.
Yeah.
So we're going to do a lot of walking and doing a lot of trails kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
Cool. Are we Facebook friends? I gotta make sure I'm Facebook friends so I can see pictures.
okay, I gotta do that. I gotta do pictures. But and of course, this dovetails with what Nancy and I have been reading and other things. So and then every time you you look up at, so when we were doing our research, then you find out about these different places in Alabama, like we're gonna stay overnight in Anniston, I think, which is just north of Birmingham. And come to find out that they have a civil rights trail within Anniston, because things happen there. That we didn't know about. So we're gonna be learning a lot of things.
Cool. That's exciting.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Sounds like a good Easter.
And it,
trip.
you know, it dovetails in with this book and all the other
Sacred
things that
Ground
we've been
stuff.
reading in Sacred
Yeah.
Ground.
Very neat.
Yep.
All right. Well, go in peace. Go in power. We will miss you next week, but we'll be celebrating. That's what you're doing.
Oh, pure and sweet, as on the highest mountain I stand.